So you'll forgive me that we did all the sanding and everything off camera. Again, we don't like kicking up that kind of dust with all the equipment on. But it's exactly what I showed you. Put the stuff on, sand it off. Once you put it on, just go back with 120 grit, sand it all off, smooth it out, and you can see that all the dark patches are gone and everything's nice and smooth. The 120 also gets rid of any of the swirlies that the 80 grit might have put on there. And you're going to want to do that before you start fiberglassing anyway. So let's just quickly talk about some of the next steps that we got to do. Right? We got to get some fiberglass on the boat, but before we can do that, we need to get the outer stem on, and we need to bed the skeg. All right, so first let's talk about the outer stem. You can see up here that I have cut this exactly where we had notched, and I came in about 1.5 inches, put a screw, and I put a screw every 6 inches all the way down. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is make some bedding material with the epoxy and put this down in, right? And the bedding material is exactly like we showed you, right? Where we take the epoxy, mix it up, put a little bit of clear epoxy on both of these, and then we put some wood flour in there, thicken it up, and bed this, and it'll squeeze right out, and then we take our finger, go down, and make it nice and neat. But the first thing you need to do is dry fit this on. So when you dry fit it, you put it up there, cut it right here, so that it slides in, and then just pull it around to make sure it all looks good. If you're happy with the way that it pulls around, then you can go ahead and start screwing it down for your dry fit. If not, it's probably because hopefully you didn't cut enough off up here. So this is the same rule with any other woodworking job. It's a whole lot easier to take a little bit more off than it is to put it back on again. So as you're taking some off here, take off a little bit. Take off a little bit less than you think you need to take off. Try it. All right. If you're doing it right, it should just push right up against it and fold right around here, because remember, when we created this thing, we did it on a form with the inner stem and the outer stem over the top, so it should be pretty close to form fitting already. All right, so once this is dry fit, I can see that this little piece of wood here, which is 3/4 inches wide and 1/4 inch thick, butts right up against that, and that's by design. So you can see here that we actually sanded this flat a little bit, and we got a flat spot that goes back into the hull, and then we do the same thing on the other end. The reason for that is on this boat we're going to do a full integrated keel on the entire boat, and the way we're going to do that is we're going to first butt this piece up against this, and then the next piece is going to wrap right over the top of this and down and around, so that'll give us a total of 1 inch thickness here coming up here, and this will be a 1/2 inch thick up here. Now you want to be real careful when you're sanding this and not sand down too much. You know, I'm just sanding enough to give myself a good 1/4 inch flat spot up here so that I have something to glue this to, right? Because remember, it was a peak, and you can't glue it down to a peak, so I need a little bit of a flat spot. I know based on how we stripped this that I got some extra meat up here, so I'm going to sand this down so I got a 1/4 inch flat spot and feather it back, and then when I go to glue this down, afterwards we'll come back and we'll fill underneath there with a little bit of filler, fiberglass up the sides, and it'll be nice and strong and integral to the boat. We're going to do something very similar down the other end, and we'll talk about that as we get closer to it. Now, the only thing you should know is, you know, no two boats are going to be identical. We're woodworking, and we're doing it by hand. So if you take your block and you butt it up against there, and you find that it's too high, don't keep sanding this down. And that would be a bad thing to do. What you'll end up doing is you'll put it on there, and then later on you'll take a sander and feather this piece of hardwood down into this, and then again you'll layer right over the top of that again. The last thing in the world you want to do at this point is to sand too much off the boat and end up with a hole in the boat that you got to repair before you ever get fiberglass on it. Okay, so we'll go down and do the other end in a minute, because we got a special jig down there that I'm going to show you that'll make your life a whole lot easier. For right now, I'm going to back this thing off. I'm going to do final little sanding on this, and then we're going to glue it down. So now that it's dry fit here, you can make sure, you know, and do this with hand sanding. Just take a little bit of sandpaper and sand down the edges. And what that will do is it will give you a pretty close match between this, which is 3/4, and where the two strips come together on the inner stem. It's not going to be identical, but you can get it close. Because again, once this oozes out, you're just going to take your finger with the glove on it, you're going to run it right up there, and it's going to fill it in nicely. Okay, you're not going to make it perfect, and if you try, you're going to sand these strips down so thin that you're going to have a weak spot. Don't do that. Okay. I'm going to back this out and we're going to glue it down. Okay, a couple of things. Definitely easy if you got another pair of hands helping you out here. It's going to be a bit slippery, so get a good grip on it. You should have holes already started in there from the last time that you did this. Make sure that you got your gloves on because now you're going to get gooey. And when you do, I should have said this before, make sure you pre-drill all these holes or else you most definitely will crack this thing. All right, so now I just need to take screws. You're going to notice as I push down on this, it squeezes out, and that's a beautiful thing. So don't worry about that till you get it all attached. Focus on what you're doing right now, and then we're going to come back and we're going to clean this all up. So I'm going to grab some more screws and get this thing in. Don't over tighten them. You're just looking to make good solid contact from one to the other. And all the daylight should go away as soon as you set the screw. All right, so now we got that thing set down in there. Got a nice good squeeze out all the way down. So now I'm just going to take all that extra out of there so we don't have to sand it. Spend a little time, get this done, get it done right. Because it's a whole lot easier doing this now than it would be sanding it off later. Those places where the boat and the stem don't match up perfectly, just take your finger and you're going to just run it right down. And that'll fill all the gaps. All right. Okay, so you may be wondering why I'm not overly concerned about the screws on this thing being deck screws and not very decorative. It's because they're not going to be sticking around very long. They're really just there to hold this in place so that it'll glue up nice. Remember, we're going to have a piece of wood that's going to end up coming right over the top of this whole thing. So those screws are out of there. That's after this is dried and set, we'll back those screws out and we will fill them in either with wood bungs or with epoxy. Wood bungs not really necessary. I would just use epoxy if I were you, because again you're going to be covering them up. All right, so that is pretty much that. Now you will be doing one more sanding on this before we fiberglass. And the reason for that is this dock area here will actually show up if you're going to be doing bright work, right? So if you're going to be glassing this up and you're not going to be painting the boat, you most definitely are going to do another sanding on this to get rid of all this dock area here. If you're going to be painting, just a light sanding will do the trick because nobody will ever see it anyway. Okay, so this is all in place. I've got my fillets here and I'm happy. So I'm going to let that dry and we'll go down and start working on the other side of the boat now. Now we're going to make the jig and basically do the same thing for the back that we did for the front. We're going to do what's called bedding the skeg. The skeg or the dead wood will rise up from here and then come in and connect to the keel here and go all the way down. All right, so what we've done is we've made a jig, and you're going to make the same jig because it's absolutely invaluable and you absolutely have to do this. And the jig is really simple. This is just stock, general stock that I had lying around. And inside the middle here, I've got a 3/4 inch block, 3/4 inch block, 3/4, 3/4. It doesn't matter how big they are, just as long as they're 3/4 wide. The reason for that is we are going to build up our skeg using a 3/4 inch piece here, right? And I have one of those right here. The idea is it will slide through there, and we will be connecting it down here, and we'll just build up, build up, build up until we have a skeg that we can cut and connect into a keel. All right, so in order to do that, a couple of smart things that you need to do. First, I used a pneumatic stapler. You can use whatever you need to use to, you can just glue them and clamp them overnight if you want to. And then up here, where I'm going to be putting in the deadwood and stacking it, I have cellophane packing tape wrapped right around there. The reason is obvious, because we're going to be using epoxy, making the layers, and we don't want the jig sticking to the actual deadwood. So the way to get around that is to simply put some cellophane tape in the middle here. Okay, on these blocks that are inside, I simply line them up so that they're not in the way. So first, down here, I still got enough of the paper of the pattern left here so that I've got a line going this way and a line going this way. And where the paper was missing, I just drew the line straight up the middle there. That gives me a place that I can set this down. And I just put that on with hot glue so that that'll pop right back off again. And then what I did is I measured up about how far I could put this without having it in the way. And you want to get it as far away from this one as you can so that you get that, distance. When you're measuring a straight line, the farther out you go, the straighter it gets. That's just the way physics works, right? So I've got a line that I draw up the side and down that way so that I can line the center line of the transom up with that on both of those. And in theory now, I should be lined up straight down the boat. So I'm going to go ahead and hot glue this on, and then what we're going to do is we're going to take a string, we're going to tie it there, and we're going to pull it all the way down to a nail that we have in the center of the outer stem that we put on there. Wrap the string around, and then we're going to check it and find dead center of here. The piece of deadwood, or the deadwood bedding that we're putting on right now, is really critical, because from here, that's what we use to build up every layer that comes from it. So if we mess up the first layer, every layer after that's going to be messed up. And, it might be an old joke, but if you've got a deadwood that does this, you will paddle in circles. So you want to make sure that deadwood is straight up and down and straight down the boat, so that as you're rowing this thing, it's just pulling you straight through the water. It's kind of like a fin going through the back. All right, so the first thing is I got a hot glue gun going here, and I'm going to put a little hot glue going down. And you want to make sure that you got enough so that it stays nice and tight. Again, we talked about this before. All the hot glue that we use in this process is crafting glue and not carpentry glue, because carpentry hot glue is tenacious and it will stick. So you don't want to be using that stuff. Okay, so there you go. So that's pretty much where it needs to be, and that'll be dry in a second or two. And so now I know that's centered, and so I'll be able to slide these in here and connect them up here, and then just build up from there. So I know I got a good center point here. I know I got a good center point down there at the stem. What I need to do is find a good center point right here. Now, you'd like to think that when you cut the center line down your boat, you did it just perfect, but you didn't. And being off even just 1/8 of an inch here will make a big difference. Now, I already know that I'm off a little bit. I knew that when I cut it. I could see that I did it, and when I stripped up, one side came up higher than the other, but I sanded it down. It wasn't really a big deal. But now I absolutely have to find the center of the boat here. And I happen to know that it's going to be about 1/8 of an inch that way. So I'm going to pull the string to make sure that I'm correct. And then what we will do is we will draw a center line on this piece of wood to match up with the actual center of the boat, so that I have center line, center line, center line, so that when I drop my keel from here to there, it'll be one straight shot going right down the boat. Okay? So that's the plan. And we're going to do that right now with the to set that string. Okay. Well, now that I got my string pulled from one end to the other, I know that I am center down there and center up here, so all I need to do is make a little mark here where center is going to be, and it's just a tad off from where the strips came together, and that's fine. So now I'm going to make a center line on the deadwood bed right here, line them up, and then just glue it from there down, and that should be a really good start to putting our deadwood on. Okay, so this goes on pretty much exactly like the outer stem did. The only difference is, you know, because I'm working alone here, I'm going to use a pneumatic stapler. I'm going to be using galvanized staples, and they're only about 1/2 inch. So it'll go through that quarter and into this, and it should give me still plenty of room to play with. And then from there, we'll show you how to build up. All right, if you are going to use a stapler, make sure they're galvanized. Make sure that there's nothing that's going to rust or get damp and get rusty in there. Okay, well, that came out just perfect. So, presumably you don't need the string anymore, so just cut it, get it out of your way, because it will be in your way. All right, so we got one more step we need to do here before we close down for the night and let everything settle down and dry. You're going to need a plastic pick and nick spoon, and you're going to need a putty knife. And what I did is add a little bit more thickener to this so that it doesn't even run anymore, right? Still pliable, but it doesn't run anymore. And what we're going to do, because of the dynamics of the boat, down here it's 3/4 of an inch wide on the boat itself, and that's a beautiful thing. As we move up, the boat gets wider and wider and wider, and in order to get that flat spot, you start to get this gap in here, and that's perfectly normal. So what we're going to do after you've cleaned it out is fill it back in. So I'm going to take some of this thickened epoxy and put it right in there. All right. You'll probably be doing it from that side of the boat, which will make it a bit easier, but I want you to be able to see what I'm doing here. All right, so basically I'm just, what the cake makers would say, buttering it in there. And again, make sure when we're done here, we're going to clean everything up nice and clean to make sure we have as little sanding to do as possible. Okay. All the way down. Now the reason we're doing this, I'm going to have to get in front of you here. The reason we're doing this is because the next step is going to require us to fiberglass. Or at least put the filler coat on to get ready to fiberglass. And fiberglass does not like tight corners. You're going to hear me say that a dozen times. It just doesn't like it. So what we're going to do now is take that spoon and we're going to make a little fillet all the way up and down there. Okay, so I'm going to do a sloppy job from back here so that you can see, but basically you just simply take the spoon and you pull it down. And that should make a nice even little run all down there. Okay, I'm going to get on the other side here. Just going to pull it down. All right, so then after this I'm going to take the putty knife, I'm going to go back, I'm going to clean all this up, because we don't want to have to sand it up, and I'll take care of that in a minute. Yeah, the idea is, you know, after this, we're going to put our saturation coat on and we're going to put our fiberglass on. Fiberglass doesn't like those tight corners. So we want that, excuse me, we want that fiberglass to come right up the side nice and smooth, and so that we can sand it right down there and start bedding right from there, and that'll give us nice strong contact. Then we put another little piece of fiberglass there, and then we put our final fiberglass on, and this thing will be nice and strong. Last thing that I would say is, you know, this boat is a really sleek rowing boat. You know, the 14-footer is a bit wider in the bottom, so this is actually 1.5 inches. On this boat, it's 3/4 of an inch. If you look at this and say, you know, it looks a little dainty, looks a little delicate to me, I want to go a little bigger to a 1, 1.25, I wouldn't go any bigger than that on this boat. But if you wanted to go to that, that just means down here, you're going to have to fill in down here with something, right? So, I'm not telling you not to do it, but it's definitely going to create some more work. Now, I'm going to stick with the 3/4 inch here and go right up the side, because this one only comes up about this high. It's fairly small to begin with. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and clean this up, and then we're going to let it set for the night, and that's all.